U.S., I have some stats in front of me. 35 million people in the U.S. don't get enough food on a day-to-day basis. That's just under 1 to 10 for the actual
Hmm.
populace of the U.S. This one's wild. More than half of all food bank recipients are employed, but they're still not making enough money to afford feeding their families. And 1 in 8 Americans deals with hunger every day, and one of in six American children deal with hunger every day. I was thinking about this. I think most people, it's tough to get people's attention sometimes because this is invisible. I mean, if you just look at the number of people you know in your life, there is probably a good likelihood that somebody may be dealing with this, but very quietly and invisibly right in front of you. So I don't care if it's the program you have going on or just people donating money or a collaboration of all of those things. I mean, the fact that 1 in 10, 10% of our population is dealing with that, I think it's an issue that needs as much help as humanly possible. Whatever speaks to that person, go help. Um, you mentioned something when he went into the DNR department. You thought that it was going to be the end when he brought up the religious aspect. Have you found resistance to people wanting to be involved because this is run through a faith-based organization?
Not as much as you might think. I think the fact that we're willing to work with most anybody and serve most anybody bridges that gap. Um, we're not part of a particular church or denomination at this point. It ran that way. Our program ran that way for I think a year or two, and then began to grow to the point that it had a budget the same size as the church that was hosting it. So it made sense to become a separate organization. So we're a regular 501c3 nonprofit organization. We just happens to be that most of the people that started it and the people that volunteer with it tend to be people of faith. I think they gravitate towards it. And for those that maybe aren't interested in that, we don't shove it down anybody's throat.
Yeah.
We just that's the motivation for what we do. We give God credit for inspiring it, for providing for it, and for using it to help people. And anybody that wants to be part of that's welcome. And if somebody doesn't, there's other options out there, things that they could be involved in to help people too.
It's always interesting to me what people's personal hangups are. I'm
Mm,
relatively agnostic about just about everything in my life. Like, just go believe what you want to believe and live a fulfilled life. And I get to choose what I hold on to and what I let go. I've
yeah.
watched people who have turned down helping hands because they don't agree with the ideology of the person who has their hand out willing to help them. And it's
Mm,
just, and again, you and I are not going to solve this problem in the next however long we're going to be talking. But
right.
it is interesting to me to watch people resist true organizations that are just interested in helping, whether they have a message or not, or whether they need to listen to that message or not. It's they ignore the help that could come from that. It's always been
Mm,
a curiosity
yeah.
in my mind. So
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that the growth of the organization was not stymied. Um,
No, no, it's interesting because we would bring that up along the way from time to time with legislators or people that had taken interest that were looking maybe for potential funding and things like that, and we'd say, "Hey, is this going to be an obstacle?" And they'd say, "Well, do you discriminate who you help? No. Do you require that people believe a certain doctrine or receive a lesson from the Bible before that? No. Okay, you're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. You're faith-based, but you're fine. Anybody that wants to work with you. So, yeah, you mentioned a little bit ago the idea of hunger in our culture and people struggling and that it's often invisible. And I think that's true. I don't know if it's an element of pride in the American way, what remains of that people don't want to acknowledge that they need help. I know we had a friend who was an administrator in a local school. I can't remember if he was the principal or vice principal at the time, but he told us a story one time, kind of related to this, where he said that he was overseeing the lunchroom, lunch duty, and first lunch shift, second lunch shift, third lunch shift. So it's either the first or second shift that day. There was a commotion, and he went to see what was going on, and he said this boy just had food everywhere, all over himself. The table was getting on the floor. He's like, "Hey." knock it off, treated it like a behavior issue. You can't eat like that. Stop it. Let's clean this up. I don't want to see this again. Comes back around, same thing. All right. I don't remember the name. It's not important. We'll call him Billy. Billy, to the office. I'll come talk to you when the lunch shifts are over. So they finish up the lunch shifts, and he goes over to talk to the student and says, I don't know what's going on here, but this behavior has to stop. No one else around you is eating like that. What's your excuse? What's your reasoning? He says, well, sir, I'm hungry. He said, well, you're going to have to come up with something better than that. I have to watch 3 lunch shifts of kids eat before I get to sit down and eat my lunch. So I'm often hungry too. And he said, no, you don't understand, sir. Last night wasn't my turn to eat. And all of a sudden, it's like the whole perspective changed, and he realized this isn't a behavior issue. This
Yeah.
is an issue of a need that's not being met. And this kid couldn't eat fast enough the food that he got from the lunch line. So yeah, I think you're right. It's happening. There are people being affected that we don't realize. And I know there are issues on the other side of the coin of waste and all kinds of problems like that. Food. You can watch any cafeteria go through, watch the public school, what happens at the end of the lunch shift and how much food goes in the trash can, and people can become critical over those kinds of things. And I guess I always look at that and say, well, we're always going to have problems
Yeah.
and things that need to be solved. But just because there's a problem and something might not be working correctly, it doesn't mean there's not true need and people that need help. So both can be true at the same time.
Yeah, no system is possible being truly 100% efficient. I think every system should be open and available for that critique. And yeah, the excess at the food line in the public schools does not mean that the issue of hunger is being solved.